today is something different. I'm reviewing a console game. Specifically, this one is for the PlayStation. Gran Turismo Sport comes to a series I hold relatively close, playing 1 through 6 almost completely start to finish, and sometimes more than once. Sport is a game that a lot of fans of the series really look back as a skip over. With its spin-off approach to a multiplayer focus, it makes Sport really not feel a whole lot like a Gran Turismo game overall. Starting out, this is probably one of the best looking games to ever come to the PlayStation to date. The extreme realism art style and art direction serves this game extremely well. Remarkable levels of anti-aliasing on vehicles, near perfect lighting and reflections for a standard non-ray trace title makes GT Sport look almost true to life. Outside of the gameplay, there's also more exceptionally well-crafted visuals. The UI is relatively well laid out. There are cinematics and idle animations that are playing basically when you're idle. They're almost near perfect, and they almost make it feel like you're standing inside of a new car dealership, even with the older cars. The cars themselves, these car models are almost 3D scans at the atomic level with how accurate and perfectly crafted they are inside and out. Sound in GT Sport is a huge step forward compared to previous GT games. Engines and exhaust almost sound like they were real cars recorded. However, in GT5, whenever you would change cars, it would play the, not necessarily cold, but the startup sound of the car you're getting into. These were actual recordings of these real-life cars. They went and found people who had these cars just so they could take pictures of the cars for visual reference and record the way they sounded on startup. This is insane. This is such an absurd level of detail. You only hear this maybe twice for each car, and it's like a 3-second sound blip. The sound mixing in Sport is also really good. Nothing really plays out of place or randomly lower quality or whatnot. Everything sounds very uniform. Now onto the gameplay. For starters, the physics and the racing mechanics are absolutely true to form, near perfect from what I can tell. Obviously, I've never driven a Castrol Tom Supra or a Nissan GTR before, but from my experience of other games and some real life driving, the physics are pretty much perfect. Now, unfortunately, Gran Turismo Sport takes an extreme turn for the worse, with a huge focus of multiplayer, instead of the single-player focus of every game up to this point previously. This comes as a huge surprise to many like it did to myself. Sure, 5 and 6 had multiplayer aspects in them, but they had massive single-player campaigns running alongside those multiplayer aspects. With this hyper-focus on the multiplayer aspect of Sport, the game, for a long period of time, and even somewhat to now, is almost or completely unplayable without an internet connection. Even after the years of free DLC/updates, a lot of features won't work at all without an active connection to their server. Meaning if you're maybe living in an area that doesn't have internet, or your internet's down, you're not going to be able to play this game. Or, what's worse is, inevitably, when they take their servers down for this game, it's beyond dead. There's nothing to do. Their extreme focus on multiplayer is just a huge disregard for almost all of their entire fanbase up to this point. Many like myself strictly play Gran Turismo for the single player experience, not the multiplayer. They forewent basically every Gran Turismo game up to this point and alienated a huge section of their fanbase by doing this. What's even worse is how they only added on a single-player campaign after people were outraged of its absence. The campaign they added is so tacked on last minute. There's so very few tracks in the campaign, and it's extremely linear, even more linear than the last ones. And where the fuck is my Trail Mountain? Hello? AVGN, what were they thinking?
Boom.
Sport launched with an incredibly lackluster list of cars, all of which looked great, but the selection was very slim, starting before the free DLC updates with a lineup of 162 cars. Sure, after the updates and whatnot, they got to 324, but Gran Turismo 5 had 1,000, and Gran Turismo 6 had almost 1,200 after their updates. This is completely unacceptable. Sure, in the previous titles there was tons of overlapping cars, slightly different trim levels, or the same cars with racing stickers, or a spicier engine or suspension, but even if you assume 2 or 3 of each of those cars are copies, that still means there's more than 3 times as many cars in the previous titles as Sport, being that 1,200 versus the 350. With all the DLC and whatnot, it does bring it up to 350, but there's copies in Sport too, so it makes their numbers seem much smaller than the number actually suggests. And I got a bone to pick here. Listen here, Kaz. You're the god of cars and Gran Turismo, but where the fuck is my Castrol Tom Supra? I need it. This is my Laguna Seca car, Kaz, please. This was a flagship car in pretty much every game up to this point. Oh, and they cut out vehicle modding, like, almost entirely? Now they want you to do stupid daily quests straight out of World of Warcraft to get some garbage points to buy a direct percentage upgrade. Overall, Sport is a fabulous game in looks, but once you start taking a closer inspection, you start to realize how shallow it really is, with the extreme oversight of the lack of a single-player campaign and multiplayer being the focus. However, I refuse to even acknowledge the existence of multiplayer, seeing as it's just not Gran Turismo. Sport is a extremely well-made game. It looks great, the racing physics and gameplay is fantastic, it sounds fantastic, but they managed to undermine the entire focus of the series, and because of this, I cannot recommend Sport. This fact is made worse by the neglect of the older Sony console games. Gran Turismo 5 and 6 would both do extremely well with like a quick spicing up and freshen up, and a re-release on the PlayStation 4/5, like Microsoft has been doing with its older titles with their older stuff. However, Sony's not doing this, so the only way to play these titles is on legitimate PlayStation 3 hardware. The used ones are cheap, and I bought one a little while back to do so, but really, why can't I play this on my PlayStation 5? This is ridiculous. Now, I understand that the PlayStation 3's hardware was very complicated, and making a backwards compatibility patch for the PlayStation 4/5 would be very difficult to do so. However, there's some third-party guys who've already gotten RCPCS3 working pretty good. In fact, it's not great because it crashes a lot, but it's not that bad. If they could do it with basically some guys on their free time, Sony absolutely could. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to play a Gran Turismo game today, before Gran Turismo 7 inevitably comes out in March, Sport's really your only option unless you own or purchase a PlayStation 3 hardware. And the PlayStation 3 games are considerably better than Sport ever will be. As always, thank you for watching the video. Please feel free to leave a like or a comment on the video to show support, or maybe provide feedback or game suggestions as what to do next.